The story begins with two men walking through a garbage dump. They were talking about how hard it has been to earn a living lately. It is unknown who is taking all the children orphans from this God-forsaken place. Suddenly, one of them calls out to his comrade, calling him the Archbishop. His attention was drawn to a huge sack with a bunch of patches on it. It seemed that there was someone under it. Finally, Luck smiled on the searchers. Under the sack lay a little girl. The men felt an extraordinary power emanating from this girl. The aura around her was somewhat reminiscent of a saint. Both were happy like children and shouted loudly with joy. Their screams woke the little girl up. She felt tired. And then some uncertain people were disturbing her sleep, chatting right above her ear. It was soon time to go to work, and she needed to rest. The girl is sitting at a table with other children. She feels like a stranger here and thinks that she definitely doesn't like it here. She avoids conversations and hopes that no one is going to bother her with conversations. Through the window, Arisha saw the director of the shelter and the priest. The men were negotiating something, and the orphan realized that they were talking about buying one of the children. Why the temple needed them remained a mystery. Sviatosha held the little boy by the shoulders. The man praised him and thought it was a very good purchase because the little one was emitting a lot of energy, which means the air would be cleaned very quickly and efficiently. The boy at the table believed that if you were bought, you were very lucky. He told the girl that she would soon be lucky too, because she had a great reserve of strength, and the cultists would soon find out about her. The little girl replied that that was not the problem. She started screaming loudly. In fact, Arisha was the wife of the main character of a romantic novel, and she ended up in the body of an ordinary orphan girl. The girl once read a novella called The Lotus That Bloomed in a Puddle. It was a very hot and intense work. The girl had never read anything like it before. The review of the novella was simply torn apart. The heroine lived in a small room. A hard life forced her to work long hours in a 24-hour store, and the only entertainment and way to escape from the real world with its vicissitudes was reading fantasy. The girl didn't have any extra money to buy a novella, so she chose the first one she came across, and it was cheaper. The work lured her into its world from the first pages, but she was soon disappointed. The main character, the Saint Arisha, has died. The girl's ex-husband and best friend can't seem to forget about the loss, and throughout the story, they do stupid things. They just cry all the time. Sometimes it even reached the point of absurdity. A man could just sit in the middle of a restaurant and think that the color of the yolk somehow reminded him of the eyes of his deceased lover. Over time, this turned into an oddity. Up to a certain point, the girl endured and continued reading the book, but it became increasingly difficult to control herself. The reason was a series of deaths, which significantly changed the plot of the book and the narrative. Bastion's son died when he was 22. For this family, the early death of one of its members was not a strange thing. The people of the empire simply stopped paying attention to such things. But a girl named Sophie, who was a candidate for the festival, felt something different. For some reason, she felt the remnants of a big explosion. Everyone she told this to couldn't understand what she was talking about. Sophie told Mercedes about her suspicions. He asked what was strange about this. The girl reported that she felt a similarity in the energies of the explosion that took the life of Bastion's son and her best friend, Saint Arisha. The girl was convinced that the cause of her friend's death was not that she had wasted her strength and simply died of dehydration and exhaustion. In fact, something else had taken her life. Arisha's power in recent days was very great. Such reserves of energy are difficult to keep in the body of a little girl, but she managed to control and keep it. But something caused her tragic death. The best friend and Mercedes decided that their sacred duty to the deceased was to reveal all the details of her death. But the reader was more interested in when they would finally kiss and be close. The girl, enraged with anger, threw the book, but it flew off the wall and flew straight into the reader's forehead. From the powerful blow, she lost consciousness. Darkness swallowed her and threw her into another world. And now she was in the body of a young girl who knew she was going to die at a fairly young age from being torn apart by the powerful energy. But she didn't want that, so she had to figure out something and avoid participating. Fortunately, she had a good memory, and the girl remembered how the prologue to the novel had written that the only way to survive was to marry a descendant of the Bastion family, the son of a duke who actually had a demonic essence. Arisha's power, which was of divine origin, and the demonic power possessed by Bastion's son, a descendant of the demonic lineage, that was to save the girl from the rupture of her magical mana. Bastion was to become her fiancé. And first she needs to get out of this orphanage. She asked her friend who was guarding the ink to lend it to her for one night. The plan has already matured in her head, and Levi Bastion will soon be hers. The boy, meanwhile, felt something like an itch in his ear, as if someone was discussing him. He even wondered who was so interested in him that he received a strong mental message on a physical level. Arisha fell ill. She lay on a low hospital bed. Two priests, one of whom was a woman, were next to her. Both priests tried to help the girl and prayed over her. The girl's symptoms were frightening. Her breathing became weak, and her temperature was very high, and even more worrying were the rashes on her body. The young people thought that the poor thing had caught the plague, but the old priest reassured them. The girl, meanwhile, got out of bed. She understood that her appearance frightened the monks. Blood was coming from her mouth, and the priest thought she had the plague and decided to avoid contact with her for safety. The chief ordered his subordinates to quickly get rid of her because she could infect others. It was worth getting rid of the sick person quickly. The responsibility to save the lives of the brothers fell on the shoulders of a young boy and a girl. Late at night, the boy and his companion wrapped their faces in scarves and, holding the girl in their arms, carried her into the thickest part of the forest, where no one would find her. They decided to leave her there and quickly get out themselves. After that, they quickly left. Arisha heard them talking about how they wanted to raise her better and sell her for a lot of money. But the little girl fell ill with an unknown disease and ruined their plans for the future. The girl waited until the voices died down. She spat out the ink she had borrowed from Tom. It had been used to simulate bleeding from the mouth. Now Arisha was free. The problem was now to find the right direction and attract the attention of the Duke's son. And for her, a commoner, it would be very difficult to do so. She was interrupted by an attack of wild animals, wolves. But Arisha was not afraid. She let the animals sniff her, and then in a friendly, gentle voice she called them to her and asked them to behave well, because they were good and brave. The animals always loved her. Even the fiercest beasts and predators always pampered her. The girl suspected that her strength and power were of great importance, which the animals felt and behaved meekly, calmly and without aggression. Suddenly, an interesting idea occurred to her. The girl asked if the wolf knew Duke Bastion and his son. True, Arisha herself did not like this idea, but the animal began to show something similar to a demon with its body. The girl realized that the animal understood who she was talking about, so she decided to continue asking her new friends and asking them to help her in this matter. The witch asked if they could guide her. Arisha sat on the wolf's back. After a short period of time, they were already standing on a hill under which a huge city spread out. It was the estate of Duke Bastion. The wolves brought the girl to the place where fate was to be decided. The girl thanked her accomplices and promised that she would definitely repay them with kindness. Now they had to escape quickly, because someone from the locals could have noticed them and reported them to the estate's security. A young man caught her doing this. He said he never thought his estate would become so popular. His name was Wolfgang Bastion, and he was the eldest son of His Majesty the Duke and a descendant of a ruling family. The girl was struck by his beauty. How such a handsome man could be a secondary character. She simply couldn't believe it. Meanwhile, the boy asked who this mysterious night guest was and what her real name was. Arisha introduced herself and did a squat, as is customary in aristocratic families. This girl interested Wolfgang more and more, and he had the idea that he should take her to the palace and provide her with protection. He sat down next to Arisha. The young man asked if she knew where she had come. After all, these lands were almost on the edge of the empire. But the sorceress could not say now that her future husband was here. Wolfgang asked her how old she was and if she wanted to get rid of her dirty clothes and change into something decent. The girl was scared and protested. She didn't think anything bad. He grabbed her by the hair and hood. The next moment he asked which temple Arisha had escaped from. After all, everything indicated a long stay in such an institution. She wondered what they would do to her when they found out the truth. The young man said that he would do nothing wrong, but she should learn to control her power. After all, it pours out of her in a stream and manifests itself everywhere. In such a case, children are usually given to the temple. Arisha tearfully begged not to send her back to the temple, but he had already put her on his shoulders and carried her with him. He had no intention of giving the girl away, because little girls don't run away to the night forest from a good life. The next moment she regretted it. His Highness, the Duke's son, was flying through the air. The girl was very frightened because the young man's movements were lightning fast, and the speed made it impossible to see anything behind the clouds. Finally, they found themselves on the roof of the house. There was another man sitting there. It was Wolfgang's assistant, Benjamin Cooper, and he was angry that the master had again escaped from work through the window and was walking around. Benjamin listened to the young master's explanation, but reminded him that if this happened again, he would simply write a resignation letter and leave this estate, where he was not appreciated. Wolfgang promised to give the assistant something. He gave him a diamond necklace that he had picked up on his way here. The assistant couldn't believe that his boss could keep coming across such things. But then he saw a girl on the owner's shoulders. He was surprised to hear that she was a contender for his brother's hand. Despite her very young age, the girl was able to survive in the night forest. Arisha asked the guy where they were going. She didn't expect anything bad from this young man, but she was overcome by ordinary curiosity. He replied that he was taking her to the house to show his family and brother. The Duke's son called for a butler. His name was Hugo. The young man handed the girl over to his care and asked to feed her first, and then provide a full range of services for the young lady who would soon become his relative. The grandfather said that he would now prepare everything for a comfortable stay in this palace. The girl was simply delighted with the old man. His manners and behavior aroused her admiration and curiosity about his person. Arisha thought that the young man felt sorry for her, and that was why he treated her so well. So just in case, she decided to pretend that she was sick. But Wolfgang did not believe her words. The force would not let her get sick. He convinced the girl not to break the comedy but to learn to use her magic instead. After all, this would be a very useful experience for her in the future. Suddenly they were interrupted by servants who brought dinner. There were a lot of them. Women were carrying various dishes on plates. Arfa was immediately confused because she had never seen anything like it in her entire life. She felt that something was not simple here. But her doubts were shattered by the fact that the girl was immediately wrapped in a blanket and tried to warm the poor runaway. Wolfgang ordered the maids to constantly watch the girl and help her constantly. The Duke's son himself was sitting on the sofa opposite the girl. Around them were girls and women in maid uniforms. The girl asked why they were taking such care of her, since the magic was supposed to protect her from all harm. Arisha wondered if he perceived her as his younger brother's future bride, so she decided to call him his future father-in-law. The boy was confused. He did not think that he would play such a role for her. The girl asked if she had such a prospect, to which he replied that it was simply not possible. The reason was that he did not want to give her false hopes, which is the worst torture for a person. They were still sitting on the couch drinking tea. The young man said that there was still a very slim chance of a future wedding, but this needed to be discussed in more detail and to get Arisha's consent. The girl liked the man's manner of negotiating. After all, he was the chief commander of the military forces of the Duke Bastion family. His talent allowed him to quickly find a common language with people. The Duke's family itself had long had a special surname that characterized each member of this family. People fearfully called it a stronghold of demons. And there was a good reason for this. The fact was that their possessions adjoined the very northern outskirts of the state. In this area, monsters and demonic creatures often rose up. They posed a threat to life and total devastation. That is why everyone who belonged to this family or simply served it was trained in fighting techniques and the use of magic or weapons. Often, an invasion of monsters reached the very house, and then everyone joined in the fight. The Duke became the most famous warrior, constantly fighting monsters and earning the fame of a demon fighter. So the girl decided to offer her services to the family of glorious fighters and defenders. She told Wolfgang that they might regret it if they didn't allow her to join their family. The young man found it funny, but he did catch a hint of seriousness in the girl's words. But he was curious. He asked why Arisha was so confident in her superiority. She replied that she had a powerful charge of energy, and she was also a very beautiful and sweet girl, which also weighed heavily among other talents. Wolfgang said that she was the same age as his brother, but it didn't mean anything anyway. But Arisha had already left. She said that she was applying for the role of the first daughter-in-law, but she was met only with laughter in response. But to her surprise, Wolfgang put her in the servants' room. It was not as romantic as it is usually described in books. The girl had already hoped for rich gifts and possessions, but it happened completely differently. But the girl still had time. According to the plot, she would gain full strength and begin to flourish at the age of 14. The cause of her death would be the power that overwhelmed her, and she was unable to cope. It was worth considering how to achieve this necessary balance. Her fiancé's demonic power might balance her powerful mana and the energy that boiled within her. But there were no guarantees. She would not give up, because her existence would depend on it anyway. She would try to become the saint that people hoped for. However, she wanted nothing to do with the temple. However, they certainly have a lot planned regarding her modest person, but it is still impossible to retreat. Let the cardinals hunt for her when they realize the error of their miscalculations. What was frightening was that already now her life was showing certain deviations from the plot of the main work. Perhaps soon the Templars would be looking for her in order to return her to the bosom of the church and use her. It was also impossible to predict how much her powers would grow in the future. Marriage was the only possible solution to this issue. Young Bastion would be her salvation. Arisha understood the fact that when the time came for her to blossom, for her to reach her maximum power, many political forces and religious organizations would want to seize her and use her power for their own interests. The only one who could stop them all was the prince, Demon from the Bastion clan. She was to become his bride against all odds. Such an alliance would be beneficial for the Duke's clan itself and would strengthen it with magic. She had already repeatedly replayed in her head a future conversation with her fiancé. The girl informed him that she was being pursued by powerful forces, and he promised that he would deal with them himself and that she would not be threatened by anything. The next morning, the girl put on her maid's uniform and hurried to Wolfgang's room as fast as she could. She had to make it before her new master woke up, but she couldn't run fast either. She boldly entered the Duke's room and opened the window, inviting him to wake up. He asked who dared to open the curtains. Arisha thought that the implementation of her plan had begun successfully. The girl was pulling at the sleeve of her master's robe. She said that he had been sleeping too long. He asked what strange clothes she was wearing. Arisha replied that the maids had prepared old clothes for her that they had grown out of. But in reality, the girl didn't think that appearance was the most important thing. In her past life, she had achieved a lot by having a good character. But this time, she would use her pleasant character as well. So the girl spent the whole morning trying to establish relationships with all the inhabitants of this palace. And in this field, she achieved incredible results for a girl of 9 years old. The next target would be the Duke himself. For him, the girl had prepared something different from what she had used to win the hearts of her servants. For Wolfgang, she had prepared the sacred smile of a sacred maiden. Arisha told him that all the servants had treated her very well, but the Duke himself needed to be kinder to them. The girls complained to her that the young man sometimes had a very bad temper and breathed malice in the morning. But Arisha wasn't going to give up. She called her husband, her father-in-law, and urged him down to the kitchen, where breakfast was already waiting for him. The butler was supposed to help bring a special dish. Wolfgang was getting out of bed. He staggered, and at that very moment the girl came to his aid. She was supporting her future father-in-law, but he looked at her strangely. He didn't need help. Instead, he bent his arm, flexed his biceps, and lifted the girl. She asked what he was planning to do, and the Duke replied, wasn't that what she wanted when she held onto his arm? Didn't she want him to give her a ride? In this way, they walked across the wide room. The girl asked to stop this and walk in the usual way. However, her father-in-law said that she was supporting him very much in this way. Arisha asked for forgiveness. She promised that she would never again disrespect her father-in-law. The girl asked where exactly His Majesty the Duke would have breakfast. It depended on this where she would set the table and serve him. But he was more interested in whether she had had breakfast. The girl replied that the maids had fed her biscuits. Wolfgang turned and went somewhere. He ordered her to wait for him for about 30 minutes. Exactly half an hour later, Wolfgang came out clean and dressed. The girl asked how he had managed to get himself in order so quickly. He replied that he was just in a hurry to have breakfast, because he was very hungry and ready to eat even a small one. At last they reached the dining room. There the Duke was greeted by the butler. The girl begged her grandfather not to be angry with her, for she was obliged to tell him of his help in preparing the breakfast. The butler replied that it was nothing to worry about. After all, he was supposed to help the future mistress of this house. These words had a great influence on the girl and made her believe in the success of her undertaking and the upcoming wedding. The Duke ordered the girl to sit down at the table next to him. The maid helped her. The young man asked if there was enough of everything on the table. The girl didn't even know what to say. Compared to the temple, she was in paradise. The guests said that it was better to have breakfast together. Wolfgang understood that she had made an ambiguous allusion to children and family members. The girl also asked where her future husband was. The girl told him that she had learned a lot from the maids. For example, that Levi was currently at the academy and his brother was training in the Bastion fortress. Wolfgang liked her intrusiveness. A pack of wolves burst into the room through the window. They roared loudly. Traces of blood formed on the floor. The Duke and his new acquaintance did not expect this. The young man was preparing to protect the girl from the animals. But there was no need for that. The wolves howled loudly. Their howls were filled with hunger. The girl remembered how they had helped her yesterday. Now it was time to thank them for their help and rescue from the night forest. The girl went to the forest with a bag of salted meat for her tailed friends. They immediately responded to her call and jumped out of the forest in a whole pack, but Arisha said that they should share it among themselves. While the animals were eating, she stroked her master and thanked him for saving her. Without them, she would have wandered through the forest for a long time and might even have come across some monster. However, the girl had to explain that this was not her house. She can't be with them for long, and they should give up the idea of breaking into the Duke's house every time they feel hungry. Suddenly, Wolfgang asked behind her if she wanted to take care of them. Arisha approached her master. She asked if she had heard this question. He replied that he was quite seriously interested in her intentions regarding her further friendship with the wolves. The girl answered in the affirmative. But then she immediately asked if she would cause trouble with her new friends. The Duke allowed the animals to live on his estate, at the foot of the mountains. In this way, he killed 2 birds with 1 stone. On the one hand, his guest will be pleased and will tame these wild beasts. On the other hand, he will have reliable protection from that side, and no monster will be able to just pass the guarding wolves without disturbing them. But there was one condition. The Duke said that Arisha would feed the animals personally. She could use the kitchen and go to the village to buy groceries. The girl was happy because she had wanted an animal for a long time. In her past life, she had struggled to feed herself, but now she would have the opportunity to care for an entire pack of wolves. It was hard to even dream of such a thing. Now it was time to come up with names for them all. Arisha decided to name each wolf according to the year, because there were exactly 12 of them. Benjamin approached the girl. He was not used to looking at animals from such a close distance and not being afraid. He said it was hard to believe that a young lady had tamed wolves, but it was even more amazing to see. He added that he had not had the opportunity to introduce himself yesterday, but today he had every right to do so. The man introduced himself as an assistant to His Highness the Duke. His name was Benjamin Cooper, and he was the Duke's trusted man and handled all the important matters of his master. Arisha smiled. She replied that he could speak to her informally. The man replied that he could not allow this because she was the future mistress of this house, so he would adhere to subordination in the relationship. Arisha modestly added that she was still a contender for the role of bride for the Duke's young son. But the assistant emphasized that she had every chance of becoming a daughter-in-law because the girl was capable and intelligent. Suddenly the girl asked why Benjamin was always so serious. He probably didn't smile because of his strict master. The man laughed out loud. He couldn't believe the girl's words. Arisha asked, after the assistant had calmed down, if he knew which animal spent a lot of money. He asked if humans were the only creature capable of consciously using resources for their own desires. The girl's answer surprised her. She named a lion. Then she asked what the soup made from lion was called. Benjamin expected anything, but when she said it was the animal kingdom, he didn't know how to react. They came to the palace. The girl said that she had many more interesting jokes. She believed that this colleague was already at her disposal, and they became friends through jokes and laughter. The man asked why Arisha was wearing a servant's costume. She replied that she was preparing to serve her master, but at the same time she wanted to win his favor, which is why she was behaving modestly. The man asked if he understood correctly that the girl had chosen the concept of a modest daughter-in-law. The conversation was interrupted by a servant girl who approached them. The girl asked for help carrying a tray of food to the Duke. Joanna, the maid, was confused. She had received orders from the butler to help the girl in everything. It was not worth refusing help now. Arisha insisted on her own participation. The girl asked permission because she had not been able to take proper care of the Duke that morning. Her words surprised the girl even more, but in the end she agreed to the request and gave the tray back. The girl felt very heavy. She took him on her shoulders, but it was obvious that she was having a hard time holding on. She refused help from outsiders. A tragedy was about to happen, but Arisha did not let anyone near her. She fell. The food scattered on the floor. The maid looked at this scene with horror. Joanna did not know what she felt more sorry for. Benjamin urged to stop panicking and not to get nervous prematurely for the girl. When Arisha was asked how she was feeling, she said things weren't going so well. Today started off badly and continues to do so. Everything is falling apart and she can't cope. Footsteps were heard behind her. The Duke stood over the girl and looked at her intently. There was no condemnation in his eyes. On the contrary, she asked what had happened here and how she had come up with such an act. The young man took the girl in his arms and carried her. He gave orders to the servants to prepare new food and bring it to his room, and he reminded the assistant that he was late for work at the house today. Wolfgang took the girl to his office. There were a lot of papers there, which really impressed the girl. The girl thought that poor Benjamin was working all this out for the Duke. The young man suddenly said that for a modest daughter-in-law, the girl's outfit was very immodest. It reminded him of the outfit of some hooligan or a girl from the street. Arisha felt embarrassed by the words of her future father-in-law. The Duke ordered his assistant to come to him. The girl expected something bad to happen to her. He understood that he needed to praise the young lady and said that she would definitely make a good daughter-in-law for Levi. Wolfgang sent his assistant to mind his own business and not interfere. Arisha realized that the trick had failed this time. After all, Benjamin was supposed to help her tip the scales in the girl's direction. The Duke decided to teach his future daughter-in-law to read and write. So he began to teach her to read. The girl turned out to be very capable. The young man promised that he would constantly help her master new knowledge and would reward her for her diligence. For her first successes in reading, she received cookies. Arisha wanted to share the sweets with him. After all, she did not want to eat on her own. Wolfgang was amazed by the kindness. He had never encountered such an attitude. The butler, when asked by the girl whether the Duke liked sweets, replied that he did not like sweets, but he liked to eat them. This answer was more than strange to the girl. Arisha was pushed by a girl standing behind her. Several other girls gathered around the stranger. They were all talking loudly and mocking the Duke's little guest. Arisha didn't immediately understand what could have happened. The girl who pushed her said that the girl was so small that it was hard to see her. The stranger apologized sarcastically. It was clear that she did not regret her action and was not going to help her get up. Arisha's reaction surprised everyone. She didn't cry or scream in front of the whole house. On the contrary, the girl remained calm and philosophical about everything her opponents did. She had no doubt about that. Therefore, the abuser decided to leave. They lost interest in the victim, who did not give them the necessary emotions. And Arisha thought that it had been a long time since they had used her so much to satisfy their ego. The little girl understood why she deserved such treatment from the young ladies. She suddenly found herself in this estate and quickly earned the trust of the older and more influential people of this palace. But she could not be offended. But as the future mistress of Bastion Castle, she couldn't just leave this situation like that. She definitely had to punish those responsible for this, and revenge should be served cold. So it's worth waiting for the right opportunity. The girls were sitting at the table and drinking tea. Only one of them was not happy. It was the blonde girl who had pushed Arisha back then. Her friends realized that the new girl was somehow even very good and pleasant. Some of them said that Arisha was a very good and kind girl, and they were glad that a friendship had developed between them. They apologized for their inappropriate behavior. They just didn't understand each other from the very beginning. But they still looked at the blonde, who must have been their leader before this and was always used to dominating in company relations. The girl's gaze was full of hatred and cruelty. Arisha met the girl's gaze. She didn't want to quarrel with her, but she understood that it was almost impossible to avoid a conflict. But she decided not to let the guest down. She started talking about the Bastion's rascals. The blonde's friends immediately turned their attention to this conversation. They asked Arisha if she had noticed it too. One of the girls said that she could choke on her own saliva just to look at the boys. The girls also added that if they waited until their training began, they could look at their almost naked bodies and nothing would happen to them. Arisha was not ready for such a turn of events. She thought the Duke was the most beautiful. The girls looked at their friend in surprise, who thought the Duke was the most handsome man she had ever met. However, for some reason he caused a certain amount of anxiety and worry in the hearts of the common people. Arisha understood perfectly well the reasons for such behavior. After all, in his veins flowed the blood of demons, whom Wolfgang hated with all his heart and soul. He was a demon, the prince of the Bastion family and the defender of the empire. From the very beginning, the great god of heaven was on the side of the devil. But over time, his position changed. The great demon Noir gave up his place as a devil. Instead, he decided to live as a human and die accordingly. It so happened that he fell in love with a mortal woman. The lord of the lands of eternal winter and the head of the Bastion clan began to fall for an ordinary mortal girl. Love forced him to finally renounce her. The girl's name was Roxanne Bastion. From the moment Noir descended from heaven and entered her, the love of these two became the main thing for each of them, despite all the bad moods of Rosanna's relatives and friends. The believers, in turn, hated the greedy god. They condemned him for weakness and began to persecute his cult and the followers who remained faithful to him and professed his teachings no matter what. But after his arrival on Earth, various strange things began to happen. The first signal was the appearance of monsters in lands where no one had ever thought of encountering them before. Even his followers renounced him. In their opinion, Noir became the cause of the deaths of many people and brought a lot of grief to all of humanity. An unknown disease also struck Noir's beloved. The girl was almost on the verge of death. Roxanne did not last long. One day she died. After that, no one saw the god himself again. The most common theory was that he was buried with his wife because he did not want to live without her. Noir's wife and himself were buried has become a place of power, which is simply adored by monsters and monsters from all over the world. People avoided that place and did not dare to enter. Perhaps because everyone remembered the demon blood in the Duke's veins, many did not dare to speak to him or make acquaintances. Some considered him so stern and closed off from outsiders because of this. The blonde stood up for the master. She always tried to justify him and not let him be offended. The girls knew this very well, so they did not pursue the subject further. They knew her weakness very well. But it was too late. The girl asked how such worthless people could dare to say bad things about the Duke. They were not even worthy of thinking about him. Other boys or men did not even compare to him. Arisha asked her friends to calm down and not fight over her, but her friends assured her that she had nothing to do with it. She was not to blame for anything. They emphasized that the blonde had actually provoked it, as always. But her friend wasn't going to just give up. She decided that she would drown them in a sea of moral hell, too. The girl said that her friends were actually strange, because they themselves were interested in her when they would make fun of her. Arisha defended the girls. She said that she did not hold a grudge against her new friends because they had already apologized many times, so the blonde had no right to accuse them of anything and provoke them. Therefore, Arisha asked the blonde to apologize right now and here so that the girl wouldn't have to speak rudely to her. But pride prevented her opponent from addressing her with words of apology. Her friend said that the blonde was simply jealous of Arisha because she was much more beautiful than their friend, and as a person she was much more pleasant to be around than she was. So you shouldn't be too angry with her because of her character. The girls also added that she feels threatened by Arya because spring is coming soon. The guest asked how spring is connected to this, to which she received the answer that this is when the academy should have holidays, and this meant that the young masters would arrive. And Bibi really liked him, and she was afraid to even imagine that someone better than her could end up in the palace next to him. That's why it was decided to make fun of him. This storyline in the book was described as love and war, and the girl did not want it to come to that. She would do everything she could to stay away, not getting involved in a conflict that she did not need at all. The butler gathered all the servants in the hall. He solemnly announced that the younger senior gentleman was to return the next day. We must not relax, but must prepare ourselves as much as possible for this. The girl was wild to watch all this. After all, only an 11-year-old boy was returning, and everyone around her was almost panicking from this fact. But she understood that the next owner of the house was returning. Hugo talked to the girl. He asked how her days were going and if anyone had dared to touch her. The old man suspected something, but he did not ask the girl directly about what had happened between her and the girls. Arisha thought about the fact that more than 3 days had passed since her arrival at the palace, and she had not really made any real friends with anyone. However, it was worth noting her position in the conversation with the aggressor Bibi. Another important step was meeting the groom, Uncle Tony. They became friends after an incident with a mare who seemed to be going wild because of her pregnancy and the problems associated with it. The man once saw the girl getting along with the wolves in the forest and asked if she could help him with this. After all, if she had made friends with a fierce beast, she should also help with the mare. At first, she was confused and didn't know what to say. She couldn't say that it was her magical ability that caused it, so she decided to say that it was just talent and ability to do it. And so it all happened. Tony asked her to try her talent not in the forest with wolves, but in the stable on a mare. The girl agreed. The animal was called Queensberry. The mare immediately made contact with the newly arrived girl. Arisha spoke to her gently and talked to her. She was understanding of the animal's suffering and emphasized that she needed to eat well and drink water for the sake of her future cub. Queensberry seemed to understand her and so obediently obeyed. Tony was very grateful for that. He really didn't know how to approach the mare because of her poor condition, but now the latter's behavior changed right before his eyes. The girl also added that she was sure that the mare was supposed to give birth tonight or at night. So she asked to stay with the future mother. The man replied that it was a fashionable arrangement. In return, the girl asked to be praised at least once in front of the Duke. The man replied that he would not only praise her, but also praise her in front of everyone and talk about her decency and honesty to others. The girl felt very sorry for the mare, who was suffering from prenatal pain. Therefore, she suggested that the animal talk almost all night so that she would not be so scared and nervous before giving birth. An hour later, they were already discussing the mare's husband. He turned out to be not such a bad guy, on the contrary, handsome, but simply busy with work and distracted from home for this, and therefore not near her. Arish came to the conclusion that a real family is very good. Mala even wanted to say that she herself needed to get married as soon as possible, but something strange was starting to happen with her new friend. The baby began to come out, and although the girl had never done anything like this before, she promised to help with this. Arisha ordered Queensberry to strain, and the assistant herself would pull the baby into the world. 3 hours later, the girl was holding a little grasshopper in her arms. Their joint venture was a success, and Arisha was proud to have given birth to an animal. At that moment, she felt the importance of the creature's life. Arisha asked Queensberry to remain calm and take care of the newborn while she ran to get Uncle Tony so that he could do everything from now on, as a true professional groom should. When the girl jumped out of the stable, a huge horse appeared before her in the moonlight, with a rider who was skillfully holding his saddle. The rider turned out to be a boy about Arisha's age. He was riding the horse. This is how the girl first met her future husband. The meeting turned out to be not as romantic as described in books, but it certainly had an enchanting appearance and was quite vivid for both of them. The horse was nervous, so he tried to hit the girl with his hoof. Wolfgang came to the rescue. He stopped the hoof with his hand and held it. The girl didn't even have time to get scared. However, she stepped back. She fell to the ground and the horse and rider stood directly above her. The horse was actually very tall and large. The Duke's son seemed like a toy on it, but he controlled the animal skillfully. Levi and Wolfgang studied the girl sitting on the floor. She felt embarrassed by the amount of attention her modest persona had attracted. The boy said it was the first time he had seen her at the Duke's estate, and he was also surprised by the blood of the horse that was coming from her. The boy believed that she could have harmed the mare and treated her badly. However, it could also be that the stranger, on the contrary, helped the horse. After that, Arisha told what business had brought her to the stable. She also added that Knight, Levi's horse, demanded to be led into the stable as soon as possible, where he would finally see his wife and child. Levi jumped off his horse and set him free. He ran towards the building, saying something in his horse language. He called to Queensberry and told him that he was finally home. The boy was pleased by this. Wolfgang, his younger brother, and Arisha watched the horses graze. It was a celebration of life. The little one told his brother that the horse had been restless all day, so he decided to return earlier than planned. Levi replied that the ceremony at the academy had taken place the day before, so he rode completely free all night without rest. He was not afraid of the prospect of slipping somewhere in the dark and falling off his horse and breaking something. The younger brother apologized to the girl and Wolfgang. He believed that his sudden visit had caused a lot of trouble and had almost injured and maimed the guest of their house. He felt ashamed. The little one bowed to Arisha. The older brother reminded him that he had urgent matters to attend to and that he had to leave the company. But Levi outdid him. He said that he would go up himself and the rat would stay with the guest. The girl became angry because she had almost been run over, and for this they simply asked her to forgive them. The older brother said that he had not expected anything more, and he was right in that. The character of the Bharat did not change. He asked the girl how she would act after this meeting. After all, if she surrendered, no one would judge her. The demonstration of character showed and revealed all of Levi's cards. She replied that it was even more interesting this way. She added that the word give up is not in her dictionary, so she will definitely win the heart of her fiancé. And even more, she will turn him into someone who definitely cannot live without her and will dream of her. The next morning, Benjamin caught the girl doing something strange. She was beating a tree with her hand and repeating a koan about the strength of the human spirit and knowing oneself. The man dared to ask what was going on. He asked if this was the moment when she lost her mind, but right now she was more interested in what the assistant had brought for her, so he had to read the letter addressed to her immediately. It spoke of Levi's character. Arisha learned that her future fiancé had been fencing since childhood. He reached extraordinary heights in swordsmanship after he entered the academy and began practicing professionally. But she was even more interested in the reasons for such a bad temper. Benjamin was reluctant to talk about this. There was no information about this fact at all, only something closer to gossip. Everyone said that it was congenital. The assistant said that the boy simply understood the emotions of strangers in such a strange way. It was his specialty. 4 years ago, a situation occurred that frightened his nannies and servants. The boy stepped on the bird and crushed it. The servant who was supposed to supervise him asked if the boy had really done it. His act was truly horrific and bloody for his young age. The boy explained the reason for his action by saying that a chick that fell out of the nest would not survive on its own anyway, and its parents would not be able to lift it into a house and cure it according to the laws of nature. The little one seriously didn't understand the reasons for the adult's concern. He asked if he had really done something terrible. He just wanted to help speed up the natural process and nothing more. So he didn't understand anything. The girl listened attentively to the man's story, and only one word came to her mind. And it sounded like this: psychopath. For some reason, she even felt scared that she wanted to connect her future with such a person. It was frightening that a 4-year-old child would simply take and kill a small bird. However, his attitude towards his horse did not suggest similar thoughts. He treated it with the respect and love he was capable of. Benjamin added that doctors and magicians are still racking their brains over what it could be, but if it is indeed a congenital defect, then the little one needs to be helped to concentrate, at least mentally. But all this was only gossip. People said that Levi's father had also been distinguished by a peculiar bloodlust in his childhood. However, it is worth asking the butler about this, who remembers those times and can tell. The girl said goodbye, thanked the doctor for her help, and went to the midwife to see how she was doing. Queensberry put her pussy out for him to stroke and kiss. But time was running out. Arisha went to the house. It was soon time for the tea ceremony. But before that, she met a young horse, whom her mother told her was her friend, who helped to deliver the babies. The girl dared to ask the horse if his master, Mr. Levi, was making fun of him. The horse had not expected such a question. His answer showed that the boy had never forced him to do anything to harm him. Arisha asked him to gather his thoughts and give the correct answer. But over time, she realized that the horse was simply frightened and afraid to tell the truth. The girl imagined how Levi was crushing her. So the only source of true information at the moment was Uncle Hugo. He would not be afraid of the young master's anger and would tell everything as it really was. But Bibi stood in the way of the girl. Arisha replied that she was amazed by the beauty of her new friend, and her appearance was more suitable for an actress than an ordinary servant. It was clear that she was preparing for a meeting with the older man of the house and was fascinated by it. The guest asked why the girl liked her older gentleman. This was a question the girl definitely didn't expect to hear. She refused to answer it and believed that it was no one's business. Arisha was convinced that she had no rivals for the role of the younger gentleman's bride. After all, Bibi had no sympathy for him. In her opinion, he was handsome, but had a very bad character and was not to her taste. The girl had no idea that the whole conversation was aimed at finding out as much as possible about her sympathies for the members of the Bastion family. It was a scary thing to talk about in their estate. The owner caught the girls talking. He said that they were both idlers and lazy, but at the same time, for some reason, he liked them. That was the reason why they were left. But Arisha only looked at Levi. Wolfgang distracted her from contemplating the younger one. He reminded her that if a person does not do his own thing, he does nothing and is lazy. The girl wanted to say something in her defense, but remained silent. Suddenly, she guessed that the reason for his anger was that she had not come to feed him cookies and tea, although the Duke tried his best not to show any concern about this. Levi was still looking at this picture. It was hard to read in his eyes what the boy felt, but the little boy simply remained silent at her looks and addresses. The girl understood that she had been ignored and did not want to communicate. For some reason, her friend Queensberry suddenly came to her mind. The girl was supposed to marry Levi and cling to him according to the way people in love and marriage behave. She couldn't let him escape. Arisha came to the butler's room. He did not expect to see her here. However, the girl said that she had only come for a few minutes to find out something about the boy Levi's past. The man was supposed to tell. The guest told her about what had happened last night and the morning when the young master returned, who had almost run her over with his horse. Now she was interested in finding out as much information as possible about Levi. Grandfather replied that he did not know what gossip Assistant Cooper had heard, but nothing extraordinary had happened to the young master in his childhood. The master's childhood was ordinary, like that of an ordinary boy. But Hugo said that it was normal by the standards of the people of the Bastion clan. However, it is not worth saying now that Levi has no hopes for the future of life. However, none of his relatives or acquaintances complain. The Bastion's great fortune is passed down from generation to generation. So there's no point in contradicting Wolfgang, because he's still doing the best job of taking care of the entire Duke's family, and he won't let it be threatened. The girl suddenly realized that love had once helped soften the character of the first of the Bastions, and Lady Catherine had helped in this directly. She ruled with the help of a whip and a carrot. Grandfather said that her favorite saying was that if there is no emotion, pain will always be present in a person's life. Madame did not give Wolfgang any free time and constantly mocked him. After hearing about how her wife chased the boy, she realized what role model she should have chosen for herself. Madame Catriona became a model for her future behavior. Arisha was happy about this discovery. The next day, the young lady met Wolfgang and Levi. The girl behaved as she usually did until a certain point. Suddenly, the eldest of the Duke's descendants said that she was lazy and weak-willed. Arisha was convinced that the host was more offended than she had expected the guest to be. Her refusal yesterday to come to him and feed him cookies had deeply offended His Highness and his brother. The guest decided to follow the course of events. The father-in-law was sitting at the head of the table, and Levi was on his right. The servant was attentively and diligently trying to please the gentleman and help them. The girl decided to intervene. She sat down at the corner of the table, between her father-in-law and Levi. Neither of them expected such a thing from their guest. They were very surprised by the girl's behavior. However, both of them remained silent. Arisha noticed that the boy was shy. But for even greater effect, the girl decided to smile at him especially and pay a lot of attention to his modest person. But the reaction from the young gentleman was hard to wait. Even Wolfgang noticed. The father couldn't stand it and said that his son should react in such cases and not ignore the girl. He thought and managed to squeeze out the word hello. Arisha considered this a good start for future interaction. Meanwhile, the servants arrived, brought the food, and began to set the table. They were a little embarrassed to serve when there was an extra person sitting at the table, but they did everything like true specialists and masters. Arisha took a stab at it meat on a fork and brought it to the boy's mouth, saying that he should open his mouth so that a plane could fly in. But she realized in time that she had said too much. There were no airplanes in this world yet, so the little boy was very confused because he did not understand what was being said. He asked what the guest was talking about, and she said that an explanation would cost her 5 gold coins. The boy started to look for coins in himself, but she stopped him in time. She replied that it was just a joke and asked if Levi knew what a joke really was. Arisha asked if he was joking with his friends. Suddenly she asked him to call her by her first name, as was customary among friends. Levi looked at her silently. It seemed that he expected help from his father. But he was silent. An awkward situation was developing. The girl broke the silence. She said she was ready to tell me what an airplane was. But Levi turned away from her indignantly. For some reason, he was offended by the young guest and did not want to talk to her further. Arisha asked why her husband was so embarrassed, and she mentally considered that psychopaths can also be embarrassed and are not at all alien to emotions. So she decided to try to talk to him all evening. Bibi watched all this intently. The girl was tearing up with anger at her opponent. She would have loved to be in her place at the table next to Wolfgang and his son, and to be the center of attention. That was how the dinner went. The girl was already returning to her room when she saw Levi in the garden with Bibi. The girl was telling him something and gesticulating. She was giving something to the young host. Arisha saw that it was a piece of cloth. Bibi told the boy that she was glad that he had come to her and responded to her request. It turned out to be a handkerchief that she had embroidered with her own hands especially for him. But the boy suddenly walked past the girl. Arisha thought it was too much even for a girl like Bibi. The boy didn't say anything. He silently ignored her words and walked away from her. Bibi burst into tears. Arisha approached her rival. She felt very sorry for her. She wanted to calm Bibi down, but she was sobbing bitterly and did not see anything that was happening around her. So she did not notice the guest of the estate and did not pay attention to her either. When Arisha wanted to touch and comfort her, she refused and threw her friend's hand away. Bibi said that the girl should follow her to the backyard, where a duel would take place between them over the boy. Bibi proposed a fist fight. The losing side of the competition would join the winner, Levi and the Duke's family, and would promise never to cling to the young master again. The girl's words seemed crazy, but Arisha asked to stop. She said that she usually resolved such quarrels through conversation. She emphasized that the young master must choose for himself who his soul lies with. But Bibi didn't listen to her. She didn't think there was any place for romance in such conversations. After all, it was about life in its most vivid manifestation. However, one shouldn't think that she would be led into empty talk. Arisha begged for mercy. After all, the 4-year age difference was a serious advantage for the enemy. But if Bibi did not back down, she would get what she deserved, because she was not going to give in to the guest. Although Bibi thought she had the situation under control, Arisha asked her to stop, or she would have to apologize. She started screaming, believing she was being mocked and manipulated. Bibi raised her hand to strike. She was about to give it to her opponent. But the girl suddenly folded her fingers and whistled. The opponent didn't know why she was acting so calmly and not reacting to the blow. Wolves gathered near the girl. There were many of them, and they were looking at Bibi carefully. Arisha suggested saying hello to her friends, and then they could continue their conversation in their presence. Bibi sat down on the ground in surprise. She did not expect such a turn of events. Meanwhile, the wolf was getting closer and closer to her and growling at the girl, intimidating her. Arisha controlled the situation so as not to harm Bibi. Finally, the opponent's nerves could not stand it, and she burst into loud tears. The wolves paid no attention to her. They were more interested in their friend, who would definitely bring them treats to the rock where the pack lives next time. Arisha sat down next to her friend and began to calm her down. She convinced her that it was better to be friends and live peacefully, rather than create problems for each other. Through her tears, the stubborn girl did not hear anything. Meanwhile, the guest explained that they could be enemies for 100 years. However, this would not affect the young gentleman's choice in any way, and his preferences would not change. So it's worth simply accepting his decision based on the situation. Bibi attacked the girl again. She couldn't understand her train of thought, so she asked if it was really a threat. But suddenly the girl agreed with Arisha that she simply had no chance of winning this fight. The girl also added that a maid had no right to be near a young gentleman, but she could not refuse that she would not be a favorite. So Arisha asked her to finally calm down. The guest replied that she simply respected herself, and whoever she was in His Highness's house, she still had a good chance of becoming Levi's bride, and no one would stand in the way of her carrying out her plan. Bibi asked if her opponent was sane, and the girl replied that she had only just guessed about it. It was difficult to answer this. The young host's fan thought that she was being threatened again. Arisha replied that she felt like Levi's future wife, and that simply said it all. No more words or explanations were needed. After all, if someone didn't understand this, there was no point in explaining. In addition, the girl explained that she had certain circumstances that forced her to take this matter seriously, and Bibi was beautiful and could become the wife of more than one man. This was a dubious compliment. The girls started laughing out loud. It seemed that their fight had finally been resolved in favor of friendship between the two. There was no point in arguing and saying bad things to each other anymore. Arisha was sitting on her father-in-law's lap. She asked him, while he was reading to her, if they raised assassins on this estate. He jokingly replied that that was exactly how it was. The girl said that it was hard to see his son. The guest replied that this was not normal in her opinion. She protested against the fact that the little one constantly sits in his room and does not leave it anywhere, but constantly reads. He avoids society and company. Arisha said that it had been a week since the Duke's son had returned home for the holidays, and since then she had only met him twice. He had skillfully hidden himself from her company. Once she even set up an ambush in the hallway. The girl hoped that she would not attract attention and would be able to surprise the young gentleman and finally talk to him. The man replied that on the contrary, he would be worried about the fact that his son left the room and went for a walk. He behaved very quietly in the estate. Arisha asked why he behaved like that at home. Wolfgang lowered his voice and told her in a trusting tone that it was in this palace that Katrina died. Since then, the little boy had been very quiet and did not really like to wander the corridors of this house alone. The woman, Katrina, seemed familiar to the girl. She remembered that this was the name of the Duke's wife, who had died early. This woman was actually very proud and had achieved a lot on the way to success among others. Suddenly she realized that she had said too much. She had not meant to offend anyone, but Wolfgang took her cheeks and caressed them. Today they were much softer than they had been before, so they both laughed. After that, the girl said that her father-in-law had to admit one thing, namely that he was simply crazy about her. He agreed. Arisha was very happy that her plan had actually worked, and she would become a favorite in this house. The man asked if she really wanted to be a bride. There were many ways to become a member of the Bastion family. She could be adopted by him, or she could become a beloved pet. Arisha scolded Wolfgang. She said that this was a very serious matter and her life depended on its outcome. The Duke took her words seriously. He even stopped laughing at the girl and her naivety. After all, without determination, she definitely won't be able to become the Duchess of Bastion, and she's already mentally tried on wedding dresses. It's too late to deviate from the chosen path and return to something else. Wolfgang smiled. Arisha guessed that she could say a lot of unnecessary things right now, so she jumped up on the spot and ran to the exit of the room. She explained to Wolfgang that she wanted to get some fresh air and relax in the garden. His Highness's question about whether she wanted to get into the Duke's family, by another means, provoked her to a rash act. The power within the girl sparkled with new colors. Temples and sacred power were inviolable, and the bearers of power were priests, and no outsider had the right to touch them. But the irony was that it was precisely thanks to this power that she could die. It is worth being careful. To distract herself from her thoughts, the girl went to the stables, where her friend Queensberry was playing with a foal. Arisha talked to the little one and said that sometimes you need to be straightforward and behave accordingly. A horse approached the girl with the child. Her friend advised the girl not to think about it anymore and not to worry. Although the vacation was short, it was not worth driving yourself into a dead end with men. They also discussed the issue of how unrealistic it was to get married after only 2 weeks of dating. But the girl advised them to think about getting engaged, and that way they would be together forever. Uncle Tony came into the stable. He warned the girl to be careful because there was a chance she might bump into something and get hurt. The man asked if the girls were okay now. They said they were fine. Arisha asked her uncle why he was gentle only with Queensberry. After all, her little one might be offended, and problems would start with him too. The man thought for a moment. He had never approached this issue from such a point of view. The groom explained that the mare was the late madame's favorite. That is why she is still treated with such reverence, connected with the memory of her glorious mistress. But he looks down on others. Suddenly the girl understood why Levi had been so angry that evening when he had found her near the Queensberry stables. He had thought that Madame Catherine's beloved mare might have been harmed by a guest. That was why he had been angry. The topic of her mother had a significant impact on the boy. This is precisely why you can try to manipulate him. The memory of her mother-in-law gave the girl the opportunity to plan future events and influence Levi. Arisha asked the groom what kind of person Mrs. Catherine was. He replied with a smile that she was very good and kind. Queensberry answered the same. However, the girl found it suspicious for some reason. The guest thought about asking the servants about it, as if she was actually the hostess. They all answered monotonously. Katrina was a good hostess and a good person. Risha needed someone else. She wanted to hear from someone else, something other than family matters or the management of the estate. For some reason, she felt like she might be able to shed some light on Bibi's situation. But asking her something like that was risky. But despite everything, she demanded from her former rival to tell her something about Madame Katrina. She replied that she knew nothing except gossip about the lady, but they could also be lies, so she doesn't want to lie either. All that is known for certain is that she was the Viscountess of Gale. Catherine rarely went out, and all the time, even in her estate, she wore a mask, covering her face from servants and guests of the house. Arisha asked why the woman was behaving this way, to which Bibi replied that there was a good reason for such behavior. But no one knew what was hidden behind the mask of the hostess. The girl was surprised that her friend told her so much compared to the other servants, to which Bibi replied that everyone around was simply afraid. This surprised Arisha even more. The friend told a strange gossip. She said that the senior servant said that during every quarrel, when the mistress lost control of herself, she would fly high into the air and try to hit her master. Such were the rumors. Arisha was deeply moved by her friend's words. For a long time she could not go to her room. She walked in the garden, deeply moved, thinking about how Katrina had beaten and abused Wolfgang. The girl wondered how such a strong woman and leader could die so quickly. She thought about the servants telling her that she died of lung disease. However, it was hard to believe that the disease could defeat her. Considering the treasures that the Bastion family possesses, the woman could have been saved with money for good doctors. However, it is not known what got in the way. It was definitely not fashionable to ask such a thing just like that. The guest stood in front of the window of Levi's room. For her, this room remained an unattainable dream. She had tried to get there for a long time, but each attempt ended in failure. The boy did not want company. The servants obeyed the young master. The girl more than once fell into a trap specially set for her. The maids persuaded her to stop trying because Levi did not want to let her in. Arisha cried for a long time, suspended from the ceiling in a sack. However, no one paid any attention to her. Her explorations eventually bored the servants, and they left her hanging for a long time. But the guest did not give up hope. But suddenly an idea came to the girl's voice. She gathered a full blouse of stones and began to throw them. In this way, she tried to invite the guest to talk to Levi, to at least see him, but he held on. Levi couldn't stand it any longer. He leaned out the window and grabbed the pebble. The boy looked at it for a long time and carefully. Silence reigned. He already guessed who had dared to do such a thing and was not surprised by Arisha. Both of them looked at each other for a long time. Finally, the girl said hello. He did not react to her address, but simply decided to close the window. Levi did not want to spend time in her company, but Arisha had other plans. The girl resolutely threw herself onto the tree. She wanted to climb up it to the boy's window and get into his room. But the expected thing happened. She fell from the tree and flew to the ground quickly. Arisha hit her tailbone, but quickly jumped to her feet. Nothing was visible from the window, and she was upset that Levi was ignoring her so much and not giving her a chance to get to know her better. She wanted to talk to Levi. The girl got angry. She shouted right out the window, wondering if her tongue would dry up just by asking how she was feeling and if she had done anything wrong. The idea came to her mind to sing serenades about love every night. The next time she was supposed to be accompanied by wolves. But that didn't lead to any consequences, and Arisha resorted to extreme measures. She decided to disappear for the third part of His Highness Levi's vacation to teach him a lesson. The butler reported to Mr. Wolfgang that no one had seen the girl since dawn the previous day. Everyone around was worried because they were used to the girl walking around the castle and trying to help. To search for the girl, the owner used his gift and mentally flew around all the corners of the house. He really did not find any traces of the guest. The butler asked if it was worth declaring a wanted person. Wolfgang did not know. He understood that the girl would like Levi to look for her personally. Levi had to pay attention to the girl. That was what this disappearance operation was aimed at. Arisha hoped that her son would rush to look for her. The maids and knights of the house began a search. Bibi did not know what to do in this situation. She felt embarrassed that she was doing nothing, so she decided to go in search of the missing girl. Levi watched all this carefully from the window. He couldn't remember when the estate had been so loud and noisy. The last time something like this had happened was when his mother was alive. Memories of the past flooded over him. That day, his mother suggested that he start looking for treasures. He loved playing such games with her. His mother was persistent. After her illness, it became even more intense, and the little one sometimes became scared of it. Even on her deathbed, she did not abandon such entertainment. She often gathered everyone who lived in the estate and gave orders to find the treasure that she had hidden. Everyone had to play so as not to upset her before her death. Levi was always with his mother, and together they carefully watched the others search for the treasure hidden by the landlady. Sometimes she asked why her son didn't want to look for the treasure, and he replied that he didn't see the point in doing so. Katrina said that she would be happy if her son happily joined the others. But he didn't want to upset his mother, whom he loved. So he went in search, although he didn't really want to do it. Early on, Levi's world began to consist of books. He read a lot and received his education from very intelligent and educated teachers. His worldview was built step by step on the basis of the most important books. From childhood, he was taught to think and reason in terms of right and wrong. That's why he stepped on that chick, thinking first and foremost that it had to survive and couldn't handle it. However, his mother was the first to whom he made an exception. He did not listen to her cough, which was getting worse every day, but covered her with a warm scarf and brought her special tea for the lungs. He wanted to cure her. It was at such moments that she spoke of hope, and this was accompanied by a bright smile. The boy felt light and cheerful in his soul from such things. Therefore he loved this word, and its meaning became close to him. Even when he won the treasure hunt, his mother was happy, and Levi understood that this was the right thing to do. So he happily participated, just to make his mother feel better, at least for a second. Meanwhile, the servants were looking for Arisha. One of them found her apron, and the maid servants found traces that were directed towards the slopes of the mountain, from which monsters often came. Meanwhile, Arisha was resting among her wolf friends. In her sleep, she talked about how her future husband did not want to open the door to her room. Therefore, she did not want to tell anyone anything. Levi came to the den. He found the girl surrounded by wolves. They all looked at the boy unfriendly and prepared to protect their friend. Finally, the girl began to wake up and open her eyes. Arisha couldn't believe what she saw before her, Levi. She thought that he was still asleep. After all, His Highness couldn't have come down to earth to search for her, but the boy looked real, made of flesh and blood. She couldn't help but grab the boy's face with her hands. Her joy knew no bounds. The girl hugged her savior tightly. It happened just as she wanted it to. Arisha said loudly that she had caught him. Levi, who seemed like a dream to her, turned out to be real. When she realized this, it was so nice to grab him by the neck and hug him tightly and kiss him. Arisha simply could not believe her happiness. The boy was frightened by such a display of closeness. He ran away. The girl tried to stop him and shouted after him. However, this did not have the desired result. The girl did not know when she would be able to see Levi again. When she returned to the palace, she noticed that the door to His Highness Levi's room was open. A blanket flew out from there, and Arisha decided to cover herself with it. It turned out that Levi was taking care of her. It turned out that she had influenced him in some way. The girl said out loud that it was thanks to this blanket that she felt much warmer and better. And now she wouldn't get sick after a long stay in the cold forest. The guest resorted to a cunning move. She held her hand up and said that it would be really cool if someone took her hand. For greater effect, she pretended to cough as if she were sick. This had an unexpected effect. Levi approached her and took her hands in his. He asked her not to get sick. For this, the boy was ready to do a lot. The girl thanked him. He asked what her name was, because before that he had not been interested in it at all. He also added that if he called her by name, she would be ready to tell him what an airplane was. A joyful Aisha called her name. She felt very pleasant and warm from the realization that they were now together. The girl added that from now on they were friends, so they could just talk without any formality. It was a bit unusual for the boy. He didn't understand how they could become close friends so quickly. But he felt something. It was hard for him to explain. He hadn't had a similar feeling for a long time, but Arisha was already dragging him along to tell him what an airplane was. Events, like on Levi, were developing very rapidly and quickly. Arisha was drawing an airplane on the ground with a stick. She understood that it would be difficult for the boy to understand what she was talking about right now. After all, civilization had not yet reached them. It was worth taking advantage of this moment. Now she moved on to the definition of marriage. She explained that it was called when a girl and a boy officially formalize their warm feelings for each other. But Levi couldn't understand it. For 2 hours after that, the boy listened to how handsome he was, and how even more beautiful she was, and how she could make a great contribution to society. The moment came when Arisha asked if he would like to go to the bride's house. The little one asked what was going on. Arisha silently took his hand and pulled him along. She was glad that she had managed to attract his attention, so there was no need to worry anymore. The girl lured him to the house where she often played with the wolves. Arisha promised that the animals would not touch him, but it is also worth thinking about how to decorate the house so that it is beautiful. But Levi didn't like the idea. He wanted to build something bigger and play there. The boy hadn't yet realized that the situation was taking a serious turn. For the first time, the girl was giving him no peace of mind.